Hi, my name is Jesse Orlando, and this is Justice for Gage. This is a 5-part series that we'll be going through. Be about a 45-minute segment. The first episode will be about introduction, what's going on with the case. Is the case still open? A lot of people want to know if the case is still open. Do they have any suspects? Is there any evidence, any physical evidence, or is there any evidence at all, or is the case closed? A lot of these questions, I could answer most of them, and I can honestly tell you that yes, this case is still open. This case is still being investigated through the Benton County Sheriff's Detective Department. We'll start it here. GAGE Stege Mercado lived in Benton City with Rod and Denise Stege out there in Benton City. He had a good life. He lived out there since he was about 7-8 years old. He ended up getting adopted by Denise, and he ended up playing sports out there, found some friends, played basketball a lot, played some volleyball out there at Leslie Grove in Richland, Washington. But he had a good amount of friends, and he loved his life out there. He lived out there in the farmland, out there by bonfires, by Horn Rapids, and he had a pretty big family on the Mercado side. Where his biological father was and is, and probably will always be he'll be my first cousin. May he rest in peace. But Gage, he had a tough life. He did have a tough life, but it didn't affect him in any way. He kept living. He decided to live, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to live life. He got to experience things that that some of his other family members, brothers and sisters, biological brothers and sisters, never got to experience. He got to go on trips, went hunting with his family, and he had a solid life out there. He always stayed in touch with his aunts and his uncles and his brothers and his sisters, because he had a big heart and loved his brothers and sisters. His sisters and his brothers, they loved him. And so did his foster brothers. They loved him just as much. His neighbors right there in Benton City, they loved him. He had a really good life. And, he broke some generational curses that haunt our family till this day. But today we're going to talk about Justice for Gage. We're going to talk about the case a little bit, get into the introduction of who I am. My name is Jesse Orlando Mercado. I was born and raised here, Tri-Cities, Washington, right here. I was born at Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Pasco. Grew up right here in Kennewick. Went to school at Captain Gray. Went to Longfellow for a little bit. Ended up in Kennewick. Started going to Park Middle School. Well, first it was Eastgate and then Westgate a little bit. And then ended up at Hawthorne for a pretty good amount of time. And then, I ended up mostly spending my time in Pasco, east side of Pasco. I just loved it there. It was just part of my life. It was part of my culture. It was just everything about it. It made me feel like it was my safe haven. So, I spent most of my time right there, Christmas Park and that area. The people there, we all got along. We all grew up together. We knew the in and outs of everything that goes on here, criminal behavior, gangs, gang wars, over turf and barrios and stuff like that. But you know what? We lived life out here, and that's just how it was. That's the way our lives were right here on the east side of Kennewick and Pasco. It was just low income, a lot of gang members, a lot of active gang members. We went through a lot of wars out here. We did a lot of things when we were young, and you can't regret them. The only thing you can do is just move on and keep living. Break generational curses. That's what you got to do. That's the main thing in this life, is break generational curses. Sorry, I hit that. We all have had tough lives, or we know someone in our family or someone, one of our friends or associates, they've had tough lives. And we got to see, these people growing up. We knew what their behaviors were like. We knew when their behaviors would change. We knew when they were sad, mad, angry. We got in a lot of fights when we were young. Shootings didn't really occur until really the early 90s, when things really started getting out of hand, when we started calling us Little California, Little Califas. But, a lot of us got to live through it. And unfortunately, a lot of us ended up 6 feet under in the grave. Now they're resting in heaven and with the rest of the angels up there. And, it's kind of hard to talk about because we lost a lot of people in our generations, and we learned to appreciate life. And that's what I'm about is I grew up with tough love. My mom didn't really, how can I say, she didn't really show us love. She was like George Lopez's mom. I think her name's Bernie or Barney or Bernie. And kind of hard to get, hugs and love from her. But she taught us how to be tough, and that's just the way it is. We grew up without a father. Our father was murdered when I was 16 years old. So like I was telling you, we've all had similar lifestyles. We've all went through similar, things in life. But Gage was a little bit different. Gage was actually a whole different type of person. He was quiet. He had a really good smile, very athletic. He just, how can I tell you, he was just different. He was just very kind, humble. He had a really good sense of humor, and he loved his family. He loved his aunts, his uncles. He loved everybody in his foster brothers, and he just loved everybody around him, and that's just the way, that's what humbled him is, just, the background and lifestyles we had to go through, it was just different. It was different from a lot of people. We had a big family, the Mercados are a very big family. And, we branched off and everybody started bigger families, and some people had more kids than others, but you know what? We respected each other and we loved each other. A lot of that's changed now, and it's not just in families, it's your friends. When you grow up, things change, attitudes change, behavior changes. And that's what we learn from. And it's been tough, knowing that Gage he was just barely in his prime, He was getting ready to fly. He was getting ready to fly high. He wanted to do things in his life that, maybe some of our peers, we like people like us, we didn't get to accomplish what he got to accomplish in such a small amount of time. It's been hard to, absorb, because, there was a lot of people that loved him, his brothers, sisters, and his mother and his biological mother. Everybody loved him. There was not anybody that did not dislike him. But we'll get into that later when, we get into this case. But back to Justice for Gage. First things we're going to do is, we've been getting a lot of people calling us and texting us and telling us, hey, you know what? Well, he was drunk. He drank a lot. He probably just fell in and he drowned, and it was just a horrific accident. And we keep hearing that. We hear that from some of the detectives. We hear that from some of the people that were out there. Just not even taking into consideration if something bad actually did happen. If there was somebody involved in him dying, or someone involved in him even falling in the river, if that's the case, if that's what they were saying. No, but what they're saying is they're saying that Gage was so intoxicated that he just stumbled in the river, drowned. It was a horrific accident, and that was it. That's all they wanted to hear, you know. And you can hear in a lot of the videos that come up in this case, and you're gonna see a lot of lies. You're gonna see a lot of you know, hearsay, and then you're gonna hear a lot of facts, and then you're gonna see for yourself the behavior from a lot of these individuals that, you know, it irritates me. It irritates me because there's so much you can do, but you do so little. And that's the problem with what's going on right now in this case, is that they could have did so much, but they did so little. And what it did, it could have cost us this whole case. This case could have been closed, all because there was no push, there was no compassion, there was nothing. There was nothing. And you're going to see in videos, you're going to see on body cam footage, you're going to see the hearsay, you're going to see how these rumors were started, how this hearsay was started about Gage being, you know, very intoxicated, and he was so drunk that, you know, he could have stumbled into a fire, he could have just fell here, he could, you know, that they've saved him from falling in the fires before. And you're going to see that a lot of this is hearsay from this female named Allison Johnson. And you're going to get to know Allison Johnson. And when you get to know Allison Johnson, and the more you get to know her, you're going to see, and through everybody's testimonies, everybody's conversations, and everybody's texts and statements that they sent either to me or to some of the private investigators that were involved in this case. This is a real easy case to solve, but they're making it difficult. And the reason why they're making it difficult, it has a lot to do with who's involved in the case, who was put on the case, who was in charge of this case. And in this case, it was Brandon DeMeyer, Detective Brandon DeMeyer. And Detective Brandon DeMeyer, he has a history here. You know, he's been on the Brady list here in a little bit too, and see their lack of devotion and the way they take this oath. You know, when they're actually getting put into an office, and they take this oath, you know, and it's like justice for all, and the only justice anybody ever gets is anybody that's associated with them, or if the case is just easy, you know, it's an easy case to solve. But in this case was in fact easy to solve. The only problem with it is that there's a lot of conflict of interest that goes on in this case. And in this case, it has to do with Brandon DeMeyer, it has to do with Corwin Buck, Xavier Buck. Has to do with a lot of people in this case. Anthony Berg, and you got Brendan Carter, you got Bradley Babler, and you're going to hear Bradley Babler, because Babler is like, you know, he's opposite of what his name is, you know. He's not a babbler. This guy is so, I don't know. You can ask him a question, and you're gonna have to sit there, and you're gonna have to wait for this guy to answer you in about 15 minutes. No exaggeration. And you're gonna see that from the calls between some of these detectives and officers that called some of these kids that were at this bonfire on December 30th, 2023. You know, and I find it kind of, you know, it's like a slap in the face to a lot of parents, you know, that have tried to seek justice from Benton County, you know. And I don't really want to dog on Benton County, because they've cracked a lot of cases, and one particular, it was Victoria Torres, her case. It was 3 people were murdered in that. One was pregnant. A female was pregnant, and you know, they actually did a really good job in that case. And I think it was Lee Cantu. You know, he did a really good job. A lot of these guys did. They teamed up, and you know, they worked their asses off on that case. And you know, and I take my hat off to them. You know, but when it comes to this case, this case is just, it's everywhere. You know, it's all over the place. And the reason why it's all over the place, because it was uncoordinated. lack of training and lack of, you know, academics when it comes to being a detective. And that's back to Brandon DeMeyer. You know, Brandon DeMeyer, he questioned these guys along with Detective Steve McDermott. I hope I pronounced that right. And you know, they didn't even play good cop or bad cop. They sat there and, you know, it was like, I don't know, it felt like amateur day. Like, you know, it was like a it was just weird, you know. And it wasn't just weird for me, it was weird for a lot of people, you know. But let's get to the point here, because the first thing we want to do is, you know, like McDermott says, is, you know, sometimes a lot of hearsay can have some truth to it, which is absolutely a fact. But unfortunately, the hearsay that had to do with helping Gage's case, they didn't take none of that in. But the hearsay that they did for everybody that was discredited and that lied, and I mean bluntly lied, and everybody has seen it. The views have gone up, it's gone viral. You've seen it for your own eyes how bad each and every individual here had lied to detectives right in front of their faces. And they knew they were lying. Their timings were off. The times they left, the times they arrived. Trevor Harding, I mean, his testimony in the statements with DeMeyer, I meant DeMeyer could have just stopped right there and just said, you know what, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent, and let the prosecutor handle the case. It's not up to you guys to find these guys guilty. It's your job to make sure that there's probable cause to investigate these guys and make sure that there was no foul play. And just because you guys say that there was no physical evidence that Gage was forced into the water, or he's the reason, or there was a reason, there's no physical evidence that he was, you know, there was a struggle or anything. Well, of course there's not going to be a struggle when you got a gun on you. And in a lot of these recordings, there's people in here talking about Trevor Harding shooting a gun 3 times. 3 times. Not just once, 3 times into the water, towards the water. And then Corwin Buck pulls out a gun to a kid named Owen, who I'd like to apologize because I put his real name out there, and now he just don't give a damn, you know. And I'm sorry about that, Owen, you know, for real. But it's like, you know, if we don't start talking and we don't start helping each other out and start defending each other against these types of individuals, we ain't ever going to get anywhere. We're just going to end up with another innocent kid that's dead. Oh, but there was no physical evidence of injuries. There's not always physical evidence of injuries. You can go up behind someone, you can choke him out, and he'll be out in about 3 to 9 seconds, leaving no marks at all. No struggle. And if you got a gun on you, you're not going to struggle. And Gage ain't one of those kids that's, you know, he's not into conflict or anything like that. He's going to surrender. And he's going to plead for his life. He's going to ask for forgiveness. He's going to ask you, please don't do this. If you love her that much, you can have her. I've only been with her 2 months. You guys had 5 years on me. But that's not what happened. What happened is Joshua David Smith took it into his own hands and decided Gage's fate on December 30th, 2023, along with Corwin Alexavier Buck, Anthony Bird, Trevor Harding. You know, and it upsets me because there's Trayvon, who I really haven't talked too much about. Trayvon was his best friend, you know. They played basketball together. They did a lot of things together. The trust, there was trust there. You know, they've had a little, little scuffles here and there with each other, disagreements and arguments, but enough to turn your back on your own best friend. Can you believe that? Your own best friend turned your back on you, which this being Trayvon Hornvent to Gage Steege Mercado. You turned your back on your best friend. And why? Why did you turn your back? And I'm going to tell you exactly why you turned your back on him. And the only reason why you stayed quiet about what happened to him that night. Because you know damn well what happened to him that night. We all know what happened to him that night. You can't take it out of our heads. You can't take it out of our minds. This is not speculation. These are facts. These are facts. People have come forward, changed their stories. I have innocent people, females coming. Oh man, it irritates me. They're coming forward because they're victims of your demonic behaviors. Rape, domestic violence, threatening their lives, green lighting them, tell them you're going to kill their parents, tell them you're going to kill everybody they love, that you're going to destroy their lives and their friends' lives, or a new boyfriend's lives in their life now. You want to do everything in your power to try to control everybody. Corwin and Josh and Anthony Berg, who, oh yeah, I'm really well known around here. We don't give a damn who you are. We're really well known around here. The Gen Zs, the Gen Xs, and the baby boomers that had to live through real wars, had to defend real turfs, had to defend their color, their cultures, their race, had to defend their families, their children from people like you guys, Joshua David Smith, Corwin Buck, Radley Buck. You know, it really upsets me, but at the same time, you know what? I do feel sorry for you guys. Because you guys had a chance to turn your lives around a long time ago. And you're going to see in text messages, you're going to see on all kinds of things. And that's what's going on in this case. Their own aunt sent text messages to somebody. And they talk really bad about Corwin and Radley and how Corwin assaulted his brother and broke his eye socket. You know, we hear a lot about Corwin Buck, a lot. So much that it's like my ears are bleeding, you know, that nobody's done nothing about this guy. A ticking time bomb. Threatens his ex baby mamas with their lives. Keeps them locked up, starving. Not letting anybody, not even their own family members, get to talk to them or see how they're doing. Just very controlling and evil. Now, I'm not going to say I'm perfect, but there's a lot of things that I learned in this lifetime. Is that if there's no love, leave. But that's not this, and that's not your guys' case here. For you guys, it's if you leave, you bleed, or you die. Those are the simple facts. And that's what a lot of the community needs to understand is that you guys done a lot of real damage to this community. You guys have hurt a lot of lives, damaged a lot of people, especially you, Joshua. Joshua David Smith. Joshua David Smith. That name should ring a bell for a lot of people, especially around the Fourth of July in 2013. But no, everybody's so one-sided, and that's the problem with Tri-City. Not just Tri-City, just people in general. Now, I can understand you guys grow up with people, but when you guys are over here and you guys are protecting people that have been doing evil most of their lives, there's always an end to something like that. And for you guys to make a decision like that, you guys are putting yourselves in danger, your families in danger. And and I can't believe you guys would do that. You guys would go against your own kids to protect this guy. But on 4th of July, 2013, Joshua Snap, poor Joshua Snap. I remember that day, 4th of July. It's one thing to lie about someone's, about, you could bring someone's whole life down in just one word, one rumor. And that's what you guys did. I mean, you guys were jealous of this kid. He was a beautiful kid, good looking kid, and he was full of life. And I can look at his picture, and all I can see is just him looking at the people that did this to him before the act was even committed, pleading for his life, knowing that these guys were friends of his. He trusted them. He trusted them so much that he gave his life for them to satisfy their hunger for demonic behavior. And that's wrong. It's evil. And what would make someone do something so evil? It's other people that can convince you, manipulate your mind. People that are able to brainwash you and tell you it's okay to take a life. He's a snitch. I don't like this guy, but I like his ex-girlfriend. I like his girl. And in this case, the 2013 case with Joshua Snap, I got a really good chance to look at that case. It took me a while to get that case because, Joshua David Smith at that time, he was a juvenile. So you had to do some really good research and dig. And I did that. And it was every day. 3:00 in the morning. It was hard. It was tough. But I got through it. There was times where I'd have nightmares and I'd have my nephew here. And my nephew would hear me screaming in my sleep. And I know it's Gage. A lot of it has to do with Gage. A lot of it has to do with my past too. But I have nightmares, and sometimes they're not nightmares. Sometimes it's just I wake up in the morning and there I go. I'm investigating again. And I'm sending these other investigators that we got on our team, and I'm just like, hey man, look what I got. And it's like, dang dude, it's 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, And it just keeps going on and on and on. And that's just the way my brain's been working lately, But that's who I am. back to Gage, his BAC level. Okay, now Gage, when Gage was brought back with the coroners and stuff, they did his toxicology report, and I have this lady, Barbara Bridges, who keeps saying her and her husband William Bridges. We'll talk about them later, but and then that's a case of just real hatred. But we'll get into that later. But back to the toxicology report and the autopsy. Okay, let's get back to this. Okay, so Gage's BAC level was 0.227. It was 0.227. Now I want you guys to remember this, because this is the only thing Detective Brandon DeMeyer, Detective Steve McDermott, and a couple other detectives, and not just them, a lot of these other people that didn't even study this case. All they did is just go through a little bit here, a little bit there, read a little bit here, read a little bit there. They didn't study this case, not like we did. We sat here for hours and hours and hours just to get this case to where it is today. Now, Brandon DeMeyer, the detective that was in charge, he fits in a big piece of all of this together, and that's what we're gonna learn about. You're gonna see it for yourselves, who he is, who he's associated with, and stuff like that. But back to the BAC levels, so I don't get carried away, because there's just so much in this case, and it's frustrating because there's so much evidence. There's so much evidence, but the ignorance of some people that only want to think one way, one-sided, all because of a rumor. This Michael Jason, I think his name is. I hope I got that right. All because of what he said in the early morning when Gage's mother was out there looking for her son in the cold on December 31st, a day before New Year's. This individual goes up there with his wife, and you can hear his wife bickering in the background. So we extracted her voice along with her husband's voice to get what they were talking about. This takes time. It takes a lot of planning. You got to really think about this case in its whole entirely. Just this whole entirely. The problem is a lot of people don't do that. They skim through it and they skim through it and they skim through stuff, and they just find the stuff they want to hear, the stuff that they want to see, the stuff that only interests them. And you can't do that. You got to look at this case like the devil's advocate. You can't just, okay, yeah, he drowned. He was drunk, he drowned. It was cold. He probably fell in, and I looked at the possibilities, at all that stuff. We all did. We went out there time and time again, measured, looked at the embankment where supposedly he would have fell, and it's very disturbing, and it's very, so, I don't know, it's just confusing how people can just think one-sided. It just goes back to thinking one-sided, and I understand. I mean, you guys got families, you guys got kids, you guys got, you got to take your kids to school, you guys got to watch over the whole city, the community and stuff. And this goes out to the detectives and and the police department around here. I understand they got families, and they try to catch up on what's going on in daily life with their families, you know, and it's time consuming, especially when you have to do a case that's so, it's big, you know, and sometimes, you know, when you speed through a case, you miss some of the evidence, the stuff that's right in front of you. And in this case, that's what they did. There's a lot of stuff they missed. And I'm disappointed and I'm mad, but I just can't, I can't belittle Benton County because, or anybody, because these guys, you know, they're just like us. They hurt like us. They bleed like us. If someone passes away in their family, they cry like us. If something happens to a child, they're going to do everything in their power to do what we got to do to protect them, just like us. And at the same time, they got to protect us from us. And, you know, and it goes for everybody out there. Hardworking Americans, Mexicans, Hispanics, African Americans, Asians. We all are just human beings trying to get through another day in life. But when things like this happen to us, you know, it's unfortunate, you know, and some people, they'll come to terms with, okay, well, he drowned, he was drunk, it was an accident, or he committed suicide. And, you know, we looked at all the possibilities, and Gage was happy. There's people that made statements that said they seen Gage around 11:45, and Gage he wasn't stuttering, he wasn't slurring his words, and he was happy. He was happy. The only ones that were saying that he was drunk and that he was just drunk crazy and all this were the people that are connected to him and connected to this case. And that's where we get started. Gage's BAC levels were 0.227. Okay? Gage is almost 6 foot, about 6 foot, about 200 pounds, big boy, athletic, didn't do drugs, drank with his friends, just like normal teenagers and kids do from high school that go to bonfires by the river, you know. That's just what they do. And it's been going on for years and years. I used to go to bonfires myself. We used to get in fights at bonfires. They tried to assault us. Guns would be pulled. Hey, it's all part of life. But it's a behavioral thing and a mental health problem with the individuals that are involved in this case. 0.227 BAC. Now, I want to bring up something. There was a West Richland council member. She was a candidate. Her name was May Hayes, and she was arrested for driving under the influence of a DUI on August 22nd, 2025. So around August 22nd, 2025, we're out here in Tri-Cities. It gets pretty hot around here. Like, it can get up to anywhere from the high 90s to the, you know, low hundreds most of the time, just depending. Weather's been kind of weird this past decade. So she ended up getting a DUI in August after her tire blew out on her vehicle, and an officer stopped to assist her, you know. And this is what's crazy. This is a very aged woman. I don't want to disrespect her in any way, so I don't know how to say it, but when the officer stopped to assist her, he smelled alcohol on her breath. So A preliminary breath test indicated that her blood alcohol level was 0.22. Right there with Gage. This is like a 70-year-old female lady, not as athletic as Gage, not as young as Gage, not as active as Gage. But she was able to drive. And if that tire wouldn't have blown out, she would have got home. She would have been okay. She wouldn't have been stopped. And she took full responsibility for her poor decision and expressed her commitment to transparency on her campaign website, which is a good thing, because you know what? These are the type of people that they're able to admit to their mistakes and the things they do. But Joshua Davis Smith, Corwin Buck, Anthony Berg, Trevor Harding, Lily Flayton. We haven't really talked about Lily Flayton, but we're gonna get to know Lily Flayton. Little Lily Flayton. We're gonna get to know her and Trevor. We're gonna get to know everybody in this case. But point 22, just like Gage, she was able to drive, almost made it home, except her tire popped. So you tell me, Gage was so drunk, he walked over there into the brush where there's just brush everywhere, where you have to, you're gonna struggle to get through there, and just fall into the river. And then when you get into the river at that time, because there are pictures and photos that I will be showing you here, you're gonna see that all that was right there was mud, not even a foot of water. And you want to tell me that Gage just fell, poof, and disappeared like Corwin Buck says in the statement with Detective DeMeyer? Just a lot of just uneducated investigating from just certain people. There's a lot of good officers out there, and I can admit that. A lot of good officers. And I'm gonna bring up one more just before we get into this case, and I want you guys to see it for what it is, because everybody's pretty familiar with this case, and I want to show you this is what kind of injustice we have in Benton County. It's not the commissioners. Everybody's trying to blame the commissioners. I've seen people like murder commissioners with their eyes, talk about their families and degrade everything about them, bringing up the most hurtful and personal things in their lives. And these are guys that help get Benton County funded. They try their hardest. You can see they try their hardest. People, there's gonna be whistleblowers out there that are gonna try to discredit anything anybody does. But if you're in those positions, you gotta expect it and you gotta take it in. And I can see that a lot of these the commissioners out there, they take a lot of crap. And I can only imagine how much crap they take, how many threats they get. It's crazy out there. It's crazy. But it comes back to behavior. Mental stability, patience, or whether you do things out of spite. But you gotta keep going. You can't stop. Just gotta keep going and going and going. BAC level, 0.227. That's what Gage's was. Now let's remember that. Let's remember Mrs. Mays. She's like 70 years old. She had the same BAC level. She was able to drive, almost made it home. Just want to keep reminding you that, okay? Now, I don't know how to pronounce her name right sometimes, but Let's go to Washington State. Patrol trooper accused of a deadly DUI crash. She resigned also. And why did she resign? Only they know, you know. But Sarah Klassen, whatever her name is, you know, it's not my, people can't even remember my name, so it don't matter. But, you know, this is a case of real injustice. This is a case about a state trooper that decided to go out for some drinks like she normally does with her husband, sometimes her friends. Shows up, drinks, and goes home, you know, and then goes back to patrolling, doing her job, just like any trooper would, you know, and it's unfair that, and I know people, you know, they probably won't think of, they'll probably think, oh, well, this guy's crazy, but you know, she's a human being too. She killed somebody, yes, and it's her responsibility to take that responsibility, and she should use it to raise awareness for people that drink and that are driving behind the wheel. But in this case, she pleaded not guilty. She pleaded not guilty, and she's awaiting trial for the death of a 20-year-old whose name is Jose Sanchez. She pleaded not guilty to a vehicular homicide charge related to the crash on March 1st of 2025. And she was off duty at that time. You know, there was a lot of stuff that's going on in this case too. And, you know, and you got to look at everything in its entire, you know, you got to make sure that you don't miss anything. There's always something you miss. But her BAC level was 0.17, but that's what was controversial about this case, is that, you know, she was given like 4, maybe, I don't want to say wrong, but maybe I think it was from 4 to 6 hours time for her to sober up a little bit before they even gave her a breathalyzer test. But she was really worried about her trip to Mexico, and she had no remorse or compassion for Holzer's life as he laid there. You know, and it's understandable, you know, when you get into survival mode and panic mode, you're gonna protect yourself in any which way possible, even if it means lying or, you know, doing anything in your power to try to, you know, how can I tell you, just try to turn it around, you know, and make them more concerned about your well-being rather than the well-being of the kid that's laying there lifeless. In this case, it's another case of injustice. But the BAC levels. Now, Sarah Clausen, her BAC level was 0.17, and if you do your research, within a 4 to 6 hour time limit or time, you know, management, if they waited that long to give her a BAC level, and her BAC levels were 0.17 in a 4 to 6 hour period, it's going to be about, you're looking at the same as Gage and the same as Miss May. And that's what it comes back to. The BAC level. Oh, Gage was so drunk. He was so drunk he just fell in the river. And poof, he disappeared. See, what they don't tell you is that his knees were stained dirty. He was in water less than waist deep. with his head upriver. Not downriver. His head was upriver with a red mark on his neck, and he had scratches on his abdomen. He had scratches on his shoulder, his torso. See, but they don't tell you that. They just make assumptions on where the marks came from because they're going by speculation, opinion. See, but they didn't look at this case as a homicide or a murder or anything like that. They looked at this case as an accidental drowning. They had their minds made up, and it'll show it in the recordings of the body cam footage when they talk with Michael Jason, and you're going to hear him, and you're going to hear his wife, and extract the audio. No AI in this, no AI at all. Why would I use AI when all we do is have the facts about their lies in their text messages, in their videos, in the body cam footage, and in the videos at the jail? We're a lot smarter than that. And this case is only getting bigger and bigger. An innocent young man's life was taken. And not just one, it was two. There was Joshua Snap, who died because Joshua David Smith helped provide the gun for Joshua Snap's murder. And a lot of people say, oh, well, his name's not in there, it's on public records, and you don't see his name. You're stupid, you're crazy. And I expected the backlashes and stuff like that. But when you do your research, and you got Joshua David Smith's ex-father-in-law not telling me, but telling a couple of other people that Josh was also involved in a murder back in the day. And then Nathan talks about Josh hanging around a biker gang trying to get his patch. And that he's really obsessive. He's broken into her house. And Timothy Patton tells officers the same thing. But DeMeyer, he just ignored it all. He had his mind made up. He drowned. He had a BAC level of 0.22. Well, so did Sarah Clayson. And so did that Mays lady, the councilwoman, who's 70 years old. So you want to tell me that Gage couldn't handle his liquor just as well as they did? Gage has been going to these parties for a while now. And the day Gage decides to go to this bonfire with his best friend, he ends up missing. And then he's face down in less than waist deep water. Oh man, there's just so much. Corwin Buck has really, his name's come up a lot. And it continues to come up. And Corwin don't give a damn about nobody. Been in juvenile. He's had a lot of run-ins with the police, but they keep letting him go because he keeps threatening his baby mama. He keeps threatening a lot of people, saying he's going to green light them. So why? That's why he's getting off on all these cases, because there's a lot of people letting him off because of fear. We don't fear him. To us, he's just another flea. Jump around for a little bit until he's done. And it's not going to be violent. It's not going to be through violence. It's going to be through justice. Lay the law down. You want to win and you want to gain the trust of everybody in the Benton County and Franklin County communities, then do your jobs to the fullest. I know it's hard because you got to balance your families, you got to balance your lives, you got to balance everything you guys do. And I know it's hard. And the way the laws are laid right now, I know it's difficult to put people away. But you had so much probable cause to get a warrant, ask questions, bring everybody in. Ask them if they want to take a polygraph test. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a lie detector test. It might not be admissible in court, but still, if you want to prove your innocence, take a lie detector test. Not one of you guys have came up and defended yourselves. You're hiding with your tail between your legs. 0.22, the BAC level. Gage also had 300 cc's of undigested food in the system, which is about anywhere from 2 to 4 hour period of when he ate something. But if you go in and you look at the science and you look at the facts and you look at the paper trail that these guys left, they lied so much. And even though they lied, the Meyer did nothing. Michael Jason, he's a critical piece of this investigation because, his words, oh man, just the way he said it just gives me goosebumps, and his look, and who his son-in-law is. His son-in-law is Stephen Smith, or his ex-son-in-law now. He texted me a couple times and tried to get a little mouthy and ballsy with me, and I blocked him. I just told him, hey, I got enough evidence. We know what's going on. You guys want to yep. Do your research. You know what? Every single night we're working. Every single night. Sometimes no sleep at all until we get this right, until we get our justice. Not for us, for the whole community and for Gage, for Joshua Snapp and his family, because they still haven't got the full justice that they deserve. The man that helped supply that gun that killed Joshua Snapp is still loose and living out here, and he's still making people's lives a living hell. Has no remorse for anybody. But then he tries to play a victim. Well, I don't have a family. Well, of course you don't have a family because you're stupid. The way you think. The way you carry yourself. You know what? I was like you, kind of. I was jealous. I tried to make my exes try to stay with me. But for what? For what? But you're a different kind of breed. You have to threaten people, and you got to do so much. You got to assault people, even if they look at her. Good-eyed bully, man, grow up already. Like my cousin says, grow up already. Shit. Excuse my language. But 0.22. I want you guys to remember that through this whole episode. 0.22. Corwin Buck said he didn't see Gage out there. Maybe once. But in the beginning he said he didn't see him. Didn't talk to him. And then all of a sudden it's once. There's so many lies in this. My main objective is making sure that we get this right. So I want to make sure we get back into this case real quick. And we're going to go on with Athen Patton. acting is kind of crazy, you know.